Now, Lake of the Woods is what we have in common. And I think whether you engage with it, live on it, or just love to look at it, the reason that we all came to be here can probably be boiled down to that, the lake. The commonality we all share is our love of Lake of the Woods. Our next presenter, Cathy Murray, will be reflecting on her many adventures while working on the lake. Please welcome Cathy to the stage.
Hello, good afternoon. What a great meal. What a great layout. What a great group of people telling stories. And thank you for including me and coming here today. It takes me a little bit to catch my breath after the anticipation of being here. It's good to be here, though. I've attended the museum event Common Ground for several years now, starting back from the time when it was at the Lake of the Woods, the Holiday Inn. And we had to choose between which venue we may want to attend. I think I enjoy listening to stories a little bit more than my job today of telling stories. But I do believe that storytelling is part of our community and connection. Last summer, I commenced a project sorting through boxes and boxes of family pictures. There are slides stored in those little cubes. And that was just one task in the process of downsizing several times over the past few years. When I ran across a few from the early days on the lake, a draft started formulating in my mind. I'm grateful for Laurie and her wizard team, Dorothea, for editing, and Wayne for everything related to the pictures. Thankfully, they toned me down a little bit so that it might be manageable today. And of course, Lisa for her introduction. In order to keep within a reasonable time frame, my story mostly focuses on my early years at Shoal Lake, 1970 to 78. With only a brief reference to getting to and leaving our place in Bag Bay. So I have a little disclaimer. My family's story also involves the usual ups and downs. Most of the drama I'm not including here today. However, there's no way to gloss over the significant losses of people close to me, which influence the dynamics and my love of the lake. There she goes. That's my little spot in Bag Bay. My partner Terry and I left the little cabin in Bag Bay June 2011 with heavy hearts and loads of memories. With Terry's diminished mobility, we could no longer manage water access with all that entailed, boats and cartage, storing, maintenance, and the never-ending, and it seemed more common for us, bad gas. Trying to get across the lake, and my neighbor would say, "You must have bad gas." Yeah, I've got bad gas. But it all started years ago when my parents wanted to leave the side-by-each lifestyle on Falcon Lake, Manitoba, sometime prior to 1970. Now, I didn't want to go. I was 15 years old. I did not want to go. But Dad started research on land available in the wilds of Shoal Lake, Lake of the Woods. My father and two other businessmen, George Berg and Frank Arnold, partnered up to purchase property from Clyde Bay into Bag Bay. The Bergs were good friends of my parents, and I think George was associated with Mr. Arnold of the trucking company, Arnold Brothers. Pursuing inquiries with Miss Machin became a social friendship. My parents seemed to hit it off with her and set in motion a meaningful family connection. I recall our first meeting over New Year's 1970-71. Put the Christmas tree in as it was. That's our Charlie Brown tree, right? My parents and three of us kids, me and my two younger brothers, traveled by ski plane to Gold Point Camp. And this is I think the last picture I have of my mom and my dad. We even went shopping for the appropriate winter clothing and footwear. We were prepared for the outdoor weather. And I was fascinated by this ice road. It was huge, and you can see by the layout of this photo the vastness of the property. And I have a few others that may put it in perspective as we go. But it was pretty impressive. And you can see here, there's my dad with two of the dogs out facing south towards the camp itself. What's not to love the spacious old feel and warmth of her lodge, home cooking, the dogs, ever-present Freddie and Duke, cat, horse. There may have been more than one cat, as a matter of fact. Big wood stove, sourdough pancakes on the gas grill, endless coffee and cards and stories. One of my younger brothers, Alec, was then 12 and a budding photographer. And he captured some of the indoor museum-like products, things that she had around. I shouldn't say products, they were treasures. Yes, thank you, Lisa. I'm not following my script. There were core samples saved in here, and you can see antlers that were hung and plants growing everywhere. And the basement was set up with mining signs, and you can see a papoose on the wall there in the background. Again, more plants in the sunshine. And I think this is my favorite one coming up. Just a shot and just see the warmth of the solarium with all the plants she kept. She had a green thumb. So that was my first experience down at Shoal Lake over the New Year's 70-71. Fast forward back to Winnipeg and real life. My winter standings in high school were not promising. After turning 16 in January, I exercised my independence by quitting school. Grade 11 that spring. And it must have been just about this time of year when the ice isn't quite gone. Late March, early April. Unlike stories of teen ne'er-do-wells languishing in bed for weeks and months, unable or unwilling to get a job, my mother had different plans for me. After informing my parents of this decision to leave school, Mom quickly arranged a job for me with Miss Machin at Gold Point and transportation there tomorrow. It hadn't occurred to me to argue or contest her decision, nor did I question how I'd be there, how I'd get there. That it was spring and breakup didn't hit my radar either. Needless to say, I wasn't being flown out to Gold Point Camp. My itinerary was bus to Kenora, where I'd be met and taken the next leg. A total stranger was meeting me, a woman by the name of Bertha Holmstrom. The rest of the journey was arranged by Miss Machin. Bertha would drive me to a coordinated location to meet her husband, Larry, who would drive me out to the lodge. We drove from Keewatin to the reserve, Shoal Lake Nation 39, where we transferred my stuff to what Larry called a windjammer. My eyes must have been buggy. Now, it's just became a regular state with some of the tomfoolery that Barb put me through in the next months, testing my 16-year-old sensibilities. So the windjammer, as best I recall, was sort of a flat-bottom wood, I think it was wood, boat, vessel, propelled by an airplane propeller. Like you see on nature shows in the Everglades, except rougher. Homemade, probably. Larry got me in the gear, settled, and we took off with a jerky start overland and picked up speed. Looking ahead, I couldn't comprehend how we'd navigate over or around the open water and ice buildup. "Hold on," Larry screamed with a big smirk on his face, and he drove directly over the chunky edges and into the open water, where we almost slowed to a stop and dropped 6 or 8 inches into the open water. Then immediately ran onto the next level ice shelf and torqued out of the bay. I was terrified and frozen solid, hanging on to the front handles, white knuckles. As I check a map today, I figure it's about 10 kilometers as the crow flies, so it had to have been longer, but I can't remember exactly the time it took to get there. When we arrived at the side of the ice house, it was a real effort for me to relax my grip, stand up, and get my land legs. We made it. What was I in for? I might have had a day or so to orientate myself, but it was clear that Barb needed lots done around her camp to get ready for guests. I had no idea. It was me, Barb herself, and her sidekick, longtime friend Carl Gibbons, living at the camp. Carl did the heavy lifting, wood supply, engines, snow, and any maintenance behind the scenes, and had his own cabin close to the main building. His German Shepherd Duke and Barb's faithful lab, Freddie, were always around, in and out, very amiable pooches. Looking back, even now, I'm sure to miss parts in retelling this story. Going through the pictures, I know I've lost track of time, and we've only got my aged recollections in this story. But the days started to unfold like this. At the uncivilized hour around 6 a.m., I'd be alarmed from sleep by a screeching, "Yoo-hoo! Yoo-hoo!" I recently mimicked that outrageous call on her niece and got a wild-eyed, knowing look in return. She knew. Why on earth do we need to get up this early if there aren't any guests? Well, the job jar was full and never seemed to go down. The table was set from last night. Coffee was ready, and Carl would be seated waiting for his breakfast. Bacon and eggs, pancakes and toast. My training commenced with serving him and cleaning up after the three of us ate. More and more I could detect a pattern, and as people visited or came to work, my inside jobs expanded and I'd have more things to do. Now this is I guess a mid-time. It's not the best depiction of what the walkway and the length was, but I would say, I can't even give a distance. It had to have been a walkway from here to the end of the room, and then the big boathouse, and then again another section the same length, just to give an idea. And again, that's my memory. Cabins to clean, so the cabins were across on the island. Cabins to clean, laundry carted over this walkway to the guest cottages, sweeping and dusting, beds to make, just so. Shower house and the bathrooms to scrub, sheets to hang, and then to dry, hang out to dry, and then through the mangle. Now, does anyone remember what a mangle was? All right, we got some aged folks here. Now, this contraption, it was like a round tub, and then it had heated rollers, and it was used to iron or flatten the sheets, and they were already semi-dry or dry and folded. It was a real time saver in its day, once I got the hang of it. And there were standards for that too. But it was a whole new world for me on domestic and occupancy demands of a camp. On slow days, I got assigned to polish silver cutlery and salt and pepper shakers and the precious silver candelabra, which came apart in 100 pieces and took days to finish. I trusted her then not to poison us. Oh, I recall one day we went hunting on the hunt for wild mushrooms, morels. I should show you the back 40. This just gives you an idea of some of the property that expanded the area. I trusted her then not to poison us, but I never did pick up on identifying and harvesting mushrooms. Once she sent me out to collect dandelion greens for a salad when we were waiting for groceries from town. I really didn't know if she was kidding or not, but I definitely waited to see if she was eating that salad first. And you know, as I said, the dogs had free reign of the place, and they were always full of wood ticks. Barb showed us how to remove them, safely in those days, then dropped the engorged bodies into a jar on the ledge by the sink. It was full of coal oil, which rendered them dead. It was pretty full, and she'd chuckle and tell my brothers and me it was for wood tick pie. And we were city kids, very gullible, very gullible. Spring season was upon us, first half a dozen. There could be upward of 20 guests expected in camp. Reservations came in via mail, regular old snail mail, or phone, and a party line. I was asked earlier, one of our presenters, about my memory, because I believe we referred to it as a radio telephone. But it was a party line, so he was confirming some of my recollections. And so she used a big roll of this yellow newsprint that she kept by the phone under the stairs. And I have to confess today that that roll ended up with us in Bag Bay and was well used over the years. I still run across notes with paper on that paper. But having a phone out there was pretty handy too. Sometimes there were drop-ins to make a call. Oh, and just as another sidebar, another memory, we always listened to the message service. Who didn't? You remember, good old CJRL in Kenora broadcast special messages 3 times a day for those of us with no other means of communication, right? I learned to set guest tables with the appropriate place settings in the dining room with a view overlooking the yard and the lake. The guides were served first at a separate dining table adjoining the kitchen, serving and cleaning up more dishes. After the dinner dishes were done, shore lunches had to be packed. So the shore lunches were made up in tin picnic baskets, and perhaps it was one per boat. I don't think we can fit more than 4 people in a fishing boat, even back then, including coffee, tea bags, a can of evaporated milk, sugar cubes, buttered bread wrapped in wax paper, crumbs or a mix with cornmeal, lard, and a frying pan for their shore lunch, and a can of pork and beans and a can of fruit, just in case they didn't catch fish. And then after that was done, another game of cards probably till midnight, and she wore me out. And the day would start again the next morning with another awakening. Most of the guests were from the US, and here we have another float plane example. They received full-service breakfast, which included juice, Red River cereal, bacon and eggs, pancakes, and endless coffee. Then a 4-course dinner after they returned from a day of fishing. Homemade soup, salad, main dish, coffee or tea, and dessert. I was but 16 years old, and I figured that was a long day. Fortunately, she brought on additional staff to clean cabins and serve meals, the never-ending laundry and dishes. You know, it really made me aware of how oblivious I was to all the planning and preparation that went into running that camp for guests. There was a lot going on. Friends and neighbors and strangers dropping by. This was one of my favorites. The OPP came by, and they weren't looking for me. That's the other story that I'm leaving out here today, maybe next year. Over the summer, I met her niece Carol and her family, who lived in Kenora. It was not simple for them to boat with 3 young children all the way out to Machin Point for a casual visit. Looking back now, the logistics amaze me. Schedules, the weather, food, all the gear. The stars really had to be aligned for that trip out to Machin Point. I also met some of the lake families. As I said, the Holmstrom clan, there was another branch from Dominique Island. Mrs. Pat Holmstrom was here years before telling her story as a war bride, which was really wonderful. The Malmos from Martineau Island, Jesse and Bert Hansen, all commercial fishermen of the day. Other families early on the lake, including the Ledgers and Hunsingers, just to name a few. In late July and on my own time, I helped transport redwood logs. We were using a small barge from Ash Rapids Narrows, and the logs were cut for my parents' soon-to-be cabin. And I was working with Carl's son, Danny. I practiced on the controls, which needed a little bit of finesse because I'm used to forward, reverse, and these were left, right for front and back. I practiced on the controls and just enough to maneuver when Danny was off chasing after stray logs. Life around the camp was never dull, but I started to get the feeling that this wasn't going to cut it for my career future. Much as I like being at Goal Point and helping Barb, the hustle and demands were not appealing long term. I wanted to socialize more with my peers. I couldn't do both. And truth be told, once my paycheck came in and after deductions for room and board, my monthly takeaway didn't go far. Now, I should mention here that I did have previous work experience in the city at my dad's pharmacy. I started work there when I was a young one, and I think that the price then, or the cost of my hourly wage was 5 cents an hour. And Dad got shamed into that over the years from some of his friends. But when I was working as a young teen, the pay scale there was no raving hell, but I learned through both jobs a work ethic that stuck. I did what needed to be done. In the background of my spring and summer job, 1971, my parents and 2 younger brothers, this is just wonderful. They had set up in the nearby Machin Beach cabin while they prepared to build using the logs coming from Ash Rapids. Their chosen site was on an island northwest of Dominique Island, south of the reserve landing. I'm sorry I didn't bring a map. Meanwhile, Barb offered up the little beach cabin near the homestead site just west of her bay. So this is a frontal on the beach, and you can see just off to the left is the main old cabin on the hill. And you can see, this is a high water picture, I can tell. You'll know from a future picture. There's, you can see the sand beach. And behind there is a small cabin that they were using, not me as yet. So I call that the beach frontal. The cottage was a mess. Neighbors and passerbys would use the beach for picnics and swimming. And with that, there was also litter and damage in and around the buildings. I think Barb liked the idea that the beach cottage would be tidied up and occupied. And my younger brother, Alec, took pride in this picture. Private land, keep off. Mom wanted my help to clean up, but I didn't give this project much hope. And seeing how I had a roof over my head and everything was taken care of it over at Barb's place, I wasn't really enthusiastic about that. And I'm sorry to say I left most of it to her. And this is going back indoors, another picture in the front solarium area, as I call it. Over the August long weekend, now this was 1971, my parents and 3 brothers, Jamie, 21, Alec, 12, and Tom, 9, were having dinner with us at the lodge in the Southside dining room. My mother collapsed there during our late dinner and was in and out of consciousness. She was flown around dusk to Kenora General Hospital with my dad, where she died early the next morning, days before her 49th birthday. Barb Machin was very supportive. You know, she was a calm and caring friend during that difficult family time. In the fall, I registered for grade 11 again, and at home in Winnipeg, we all tried to make sense of family without Mom. And I've heard this resonate with some of the other speakers today. Everything in our family changed. To add insult to injury, my brother Alec had several rolls of film go missing. They were lost in processing. So photos of the lake that he'd taken of Mom in the few weeks leading up to her death were gone. Our family continued to occupy the beach cottage and check in with Barb, and her presence really was like a steady beacon for us. My dad didn't come down very much, but there were still a lot of cribbage tournaments being played over there. I've included pictures of the old homestead site. Actually, first of all, this is a picture from the beach looking west. And you can see how expansive it looks. And these next few shots, this one included low water, very low water. But you can tell how far out it goes. And the next one is a picture facing north, and you can see the cabin on the hill just a little bit to the left. Again, this is really low water. There were sandbars. It was beautiful. It was a beautiful beach. In low water, it was tricky, hauling clearish water for dishes and coffee. But at that time, we were still drinking straight from the lake. That would be the lake, and it was no problem. And there's one last picture here of the old homestead. And it gives a perspective of the size of it with that fireplace, and unfortunately, the building structure itself was giving way. That's the homestead. I don't know what year this was taken, because some of these pictures I salvaged, and yet the pictures that Alec had taken immediately before or in around the summer of 1971 were gone. So this could have been taken anywhere up to 78. So summer 1972 and onward, and I'd say Dad found it difficult and lonely even in our presence to be there. My 2 younger brothers and I spent many weekends there. Our oldest sibling and his family were nearby at the Gold Point cabin. And those cabins on the island were occupied by a few other families that we knew, the McCulloughs and Ramseys and Workentines, I believe. In hindsight, we were pretty young to be without supervision. But thankfully, we honed our survival skills with friends who also loved the lake. At one point, my cousin Georgina came down. She had wrecked her arm or something, and so she was out of sports that time. And this was back into 1972 now. So she jumped at the chance to come to the lake, even if it did entail some work. And more often than not, we were off on the lake somewhere. One time I recall that we took off from Gold Point in my dad's boat, heading west for a cruise into the sun and the waves. Now, I might have assumed that we had life jackets and paddles, but I didn't check the fuel gauge. We'd just cleared Treasure Islands when we ran out of gas. The wind caught us, and it comes from several directions, and paddling got us nowhere. Thankfully, someone came to our rescue and towed us back to the dock, demonstrating how people take the time to help each other in those circumstances, and that my checklist was lacking. My maternal grandmother also visited Gold Point and got to spend time with Barb and help out a little, as did another friend of my mom's. I can't assume, but I think they wanted to be around the place my mom talked about and loved. And after a while, my contact with Barb dwindled as I spent time in the city or at friends' cabins, maybe distracted by socializing and boys. Barb kept her medical issues to herself. When I heard through Dad she'd been hospitalized, I got a ride to Kenora to see her in the hospital. Although she kept that visit very light and nonchalant, that was the last time I saw Barbara Machin before her death in February 1978. I consider myself most fortunate for what Barb shared and taught me. She was a leading character in my life. Late summer and fall of 1978, my dads and brothers staked out a spot in Bag Bay. It was a natural harbor. There's a picture of before any of the building. There was a really neat cliff behind this shot that you could climb up and get this view. And the location was much better for Dad. It was closer to mainland docking, and yet still remote enough for his liking. And we were the only people in Bag Bay at this point. And you can see later as we got developed. And here's where we start another saga, here in the Great White Pines in Bag Bay. And I have so many other stories circa 1978, but there's just these few that I need in order to wrap up my segment today. And like I said, some of them are of a serious nature. This is a picture of my brothers. I had 4 brothers, by the way, 2 older and 2 younger. And one of the older ones is still missing out of that picture, but there are the boys on the dock. So some of those facts are that my younger brother Alec died unexpectedly in the fall of 1978. And I've come to know that it's been complications of diabetes and other factors that had affected his health, but that sent us all for a loop. My father had many more good years at the lake, and I was fortunate to spend a lot of time with him. And he also shared his retreat with other friends and family, and he got to use the cottage till his last trip with Jamie and I in August 1989. He struggled against cancer until the end of November that year. Actually, it was 1989? Yeah, there we are. Oh, time flies. My remaining 3 brothers and I were fortunate. He bequeathed each of us property on the lake. And I was fortunate, I got this. I had the little cabin in Bag Bay. And this is sort of the loop where I came in at the beginning. A significant milestone that happened around that same time was electricity. So before then, we were carting in 100-pound propane tanks. I kept my propane stove, though, because it was so important that I make coffee in the morning. I didn't want to be without that. Didn't like the idea of barbecuing coffee. Anyhow, that was one of the significant changes then, and then it became the exodus. My brother Jamie was the first to sell his place, which was south of Starting Point. That was in the early 90s. And that sale helped him facilitate a move to Kuwaitan for him and his wife, who used to have a business in LaSalle. So they were able to combine their residence and their lake home in one. And my brother Tom, my youngest brother Tom, was the last one to leave the lake about 5 years ago. My mom, dad, Alec, and now from 2010, my brother Jamie are all together. Their ashes were spread at the original site that they'd planned to build on, and we called it Sandbar East and West. So that basically, ladies and gentlemen, are the highs and lows of my family messed in with our lake love. Thank you very much.